Welcome back to Active Ingredients, the leadership series for people who build, scale, and shape the future of life sciences. I'm your host, Tom Dove, founder and CEO of Fraser Dove International, the life science talent consultancy. Today's guest is someone I've known for a long time, Alan Rankin, a transformational leader with a track record of making complex businesses simpler, faster, and stronger. From running multi-billion-dollar procurement organizations at the likes of Novartis, Sandoz, and Moderna, to shaping global commercial strategy and supplier partnerships. Alan brings clarity and pace to even the most tangled operations. But this episode isn't about systems and savings necessarily. It's about bold decisions, shifting gears between big pharma and PE-backed organizations, and knowing when to challenge the playbook and when to completely rewrite it. We'll talk reinvention, resilience, and why the best leaders never stop learning, especially when the stakes are high. Alan, welcome to Active Ingredients.
Thank you, Tom. It's nice to be here.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So yes, we have known each other for a long time, but I always start these discussions in the same way. And I've never asked you this question, but to kick off, what are your three active ingredients of leadership and why?
I would say, first of all, curiosity. I think you have to be endlessly curious to be a leader. And I think that sort of resonates with a willingness to learn. And I think you always have to be learning. Secondly, I would say it's about connection with people. And I think having the ability to connect with people. And the last one, I think, for me, is probably the most important, which is the ability to lower judgment, which I would link to an ability to ask the right questions. I think I've always observed that the best leaders, they don't know the most, but they are capable of asking the right questions. And I think when you're asking questions, you're doing two things. One, you're not judging the situation, which I think is extremely important. And the second one is you are pushing the accountability onto the person that you're asking the question of. And I think that's extremely important in leadership. And I think particularly in the last, say, 5 years or so, that's something that I've been trying to put into practice more and more.
Love that. Yeah, because interestingly, what I have seen as a theme through a lot of the leaders I've had on this podcast so far is those first two. So curiosity, connection with people. But it's the first time that I've heard ability to lower judgment. I think the best leaders are often, judged by the questions they ask, not the answers they give.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it's having
and it's a super hard thing to do, because I think, the corporate world that we live in is kind of designed to judge, right? You have targets, you have expectations, you have goals, you have objectives, you're measuring all the time, you're being measured all the time. But I think that ability to kind of take it down and really understand what's behind as a leader is super important to being successful.
Yeah. And also, not diving in and trying to solve things all the time.
Exactly, yeah.
Taking pause, creating the space, and then also it's understanding how the other person thinks on their lens on the topic.
Yeah. So
love it.
Yeah, that's me. They're the things I think that I would say. But obviously many facets to the question. But
yeah, no, I think that you've distilled it really nicely. So let's kind of take the listeners back slightly. So obviously before you had the ability to lower judgment, were you always somebody, at school, university, college, whatever, that had that connection with people and had that curiosity, or is this something that you've grown?
No, I've definitely grown it. I think willingness to learn, yes. I think I've always wanted to learn, almost from when I started my career. But I think in terms of curiosity and really understanding why, I think that's something that you develop. Similarly with the people journey, in the early part of my career, I've described myself as a very kind of content-driven and goals and objectives-driven kind of leader, and trying to sort of manage up very well. But then you learn as you go through your career, that actually what really matters are the people who are working with you and for you, and how you make them good and you make them successful. That's really your job as a leader. I mean, is to make the people who work for you successful. And the theory is, of course, if they're all successful, then you'll be successful. But you learn that comes through connection, and it comes through understanding, and it comes through listening. And as I said before, it comes through asking the right questions.
Yeah, lovely. And then when you were asking questions of yourself, kind of leaving the education system, did you think I'm destined for a career in procurement, or what happened at the beginning of your career that kind of pointed you in that direction? Were there any direction posts or?
No. I mean, I maybe had a bit of an unusual start. I messed up my A levels. I'm probably not the only person on the planet to have done that. So I completely messed it up. I think if I'd have had to have it again, I mean, probably what I should have done is resit the A levels, but being 18 and slightly stupid, I decided that, I'd have a year out. So I was having a year out. I was working in bars and restaurants, hotels, just sort of picking up a bit of cash here and there. I think my mum was a bit sick of having me around the house. So she found an advert in the paper. I come from Nottingham in the UK, which of course is famous for the Boots company. So she got an advert out the paper, and back then Boots was a proper pharmaceutical company. And she said, "Here's a job, go and apply for it." And I looked at it and I thought, yeah, that doesn't sound such a bad idea. So I actually did it. And I got rejected. And then there was another advert came in the paper for Boots again, and I decided to apply. And I got the job the second time around. And that was my entry into life science. And they had a situation, I guess it's similar to like a modern day apprenticeship. So they give you day release. So I actually did my university degree through day release, which took an inordinate amount of time, and was quite the effort doing it alongside working full time. But I think in the end it was a great decision. But to say that I opted for life sciences or that was a goal would be stretching the truth quite a lot, because actually I just fell into it by accident, really.
Yeah, so thanks to your mum, really, for getting you on this
Mum, yeah.
getting you on this career path.
Yeah.
And then when you were there, so it was quite a good amount of time within one organization that, as you said, at the time was actually a pharmaceutical company that was doing some pretty cool stuff in the UK. What type of jobs were you doing whilst you were at Boots?
I was extremely lucky, and I was reflecting actually as we were coming into this podcast. The first job that I was asked, or I applied for, was in the drug metabolism lab, which was very much a kind of analytical chemistry type thing, and very routine analysis. It was the job I didn't get. The one I did get actually sort of really dictated a lot of things in my career, because I went to the API organic synthesis lab, which, number one, and not to decry drug metabolism in any way, but was much more interesting, much more varied, I think, than drug metabolism. It got me into organic chemistry. I mean, my first job was to wash up, really, so I mean that wasn't that exciting, but eventually they allowed me to do experiments. So I was developing processes to new active pharmaceutical ingredients, and that was the first job that I was doing, which you learn a lot very, very quickly by doing that kind of role, and obviously studying at the same time. I was extremely fortunate during my studies, because I was surrounded by some of the best organic chemists in the country, and I had the best chemistry library on the same floor that I was working on, in the labs that I was working on. But it was a great sort of learning period, and I got to learn from some really, really great chemists. I mean, I was never a great chemist, but I got to learn from great chemists. And we were developing new drugs. And actually, at one point, for those who remember at the time, BSF came in and took over Boots Pharmaceuticals. So I sort of went into BSF, as a lot of people did in the 90s, in that period, changing jobs without actually changing jobs. But they flipped it. They said, well, we're not going to work on new chemical entities anymore. We're going to start working on generics. So I then got to develop processes into generics, which was, if you think back at the time, that was like right at the beginning of the generics industry, and just kind of been invented with the legislation that come over in the US, and everybody was kind of getting excited about generics at that time, and the ability that it had for all pharmaceutical companies, that each pharmaceutical company would have its own generics division, and BSF was very interested to develop generic active ingredients. So I got to work right at the beginning of the industry in a way, and some of the first processes to actually make it through to generic status, actually, I was working on. So it was super exciting.
And from that moment, you then were able to move, and I'm just trying to give the listeners here a little bit more insight into the earlier part of your career before you moved into procurement, because I'm putting some of this together, and actually it all makes a lot of sense for how you've probably connected with different stakeholders as a
Yeah,
procurement leader, because then you moved into operations, you moved into commercial roles.
yeah.
So that was quite a fulfilling start to your career where you actually got to touch lots of different parts of an organization quite quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And I got a big break. So I was doing sort of chemistry in the lab. I'd finished my degree at that point. I kind of made the rank of chemist, which was a big deal for me. But then I got a chance to go into business development in the US. So they sent me over to the US for a while, and I got a chance to do that. It was kind of a big break in a way, and very lucky, because I then swapped from the lab into the commercial side, and actually we were selling a lot of the products that we'd developed in the lab. So again, it was a super interesting time traveling around the US, going to meet all of these generic companies that were forming and being reformed and merging, and trying to sell products to them, which was challenging, but yeah, it was a big break.
Yeah. And also a bit of international exposure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nottingham was long gone.
Nottingham was long gone. Yeah, so I never actually went back. So
And at that time, the football team got slightly worse, but now at least they're back in the real world. Um,
yes.
so what I'm keen to do before we dive into some of the themes and topics that we wanted to discuss, obviously you've transitioned through these different roles from chemist to commercial with some operations as well.
Mm-hmm.
When was the moment where you felt like you were actually a leader, you were leading, you actually felt, okay, cool, this is starting to come together?
I mean, coming together, I'm not sure about that, but I think the moment that I felt I was actually a leader, I got the site manager position at a facility in the northeast of England, in Newcastle. And I had a group of 100 in the group, and I was looking after all of operations. It was a unionized workforce. I remember that it was 100 men in the team. There were 0 women. I was the youngest member of the department, and I was running the department. And I think I'm right in saying, I'm not 100% sure, but I think I was right in saying I was the youngest production lead in BSF at that time, at least within our business unit. I don't know about the whole of BSF. So I was extremely young to get that kind of responsibility, and I think that's the time that I actually felt that, I've now stepped over and I'm in a leadership position. As I say, it was a highly unionized workforce. I think I got my first taste of proper negotiation, negotiating with the unions, particularly. And, obviously when you're dealing with, that kind of situation, and it's shift workers, they have very strong views and strong feelings. So I think it was a very good learning, in the sense that you kind of learn the nuts and bolts and basics of people management. Although I have to say, kind of when I look back on that time, I almost like cringe in the fact that it was, such a terrible leader in those days. But you're sort of in there, and you are learning as you're going and learning by doing, and you make lots and lots of mistakes.
Yeah. And was there anyone that was helping you develop that leadership skill and leadership muscle, or were you also learning from similar leaders at that time?
I was learning from similar leaders, and I think it was an important lesson for me as well. I think you can learn good things, but you can also learn bad things, right? And I think, in my opinion, I think I learned a lot of bad things in those times, and the way people treat people and way people get treated. I mean, you're into the processes, you're learning about disciplinary processes and hiring and firing and all of that good stuff. So, I mean, in a sense, it's a great experience. But I think putting the person at the center of it, that wasn't something that I had developed at that point. And as I say, it was a good school, but not something that I reflect on as being great in terms of my leadership journey.
Yeah.
If I'm honest about it.
Yeah. And you're not the only person that said that on this podcast. I think, leadership at that time was different. And also, but there's, an understanding that I probably wouldn't do things like that. And then actually you take a whole different leadership path going forwards. But sometimes there are good mentors that pop up in those times and give you like little bits of knowledge and tidbits that actually work, throughout your career path.
Yeah. I think the really good mentorship and coaching that I've had started sort of later in my career. I think particularly when I started with Sandoz, obviously part of Novartis at that point. I mean, that was Novartis, Sandoz, it's an incredible school, and an incredible environment to grow up as a leader. I think particularly what it taught me about finance and the way that finance needs to operate within a company, and what the role of finance is and what it's there to achieve. I think the level of education that you get, I mean, we went to the best courses, the best schools to be taught. But on your point on mentorship and coaching, I just met some incredible leaders during, I mean, I think since then I've always had them through my career, and I've been extremely lucky to work for the people that I've worked for. But just incredible minds, and really kind of show you the way of what's the right way to do things, the right way to think about things. And I've been very lucky in that respect.
Yeah, and also like my viewpoint on that kind of time at Sandoz Novartis as well is there was also lots of good people on the journey at the same time with you in that procurement function.
Yes, there were. Yeah.
So there was good leaders, good mentors, but also good peers and people that were all pushing at the same time. It seemed like a really dynamic time to be in that organization.
Yeah, it was. And, we were going through a huge transformation. So there was a lot of change going on. And I think procurement found its voice during that period of time, particularly. And the stakeholder engagement was exceptional. And I think some of the people that, as I said, some of the people that I work with, I mean, one that always sticks out to me was the person who gave me the job, first of all, in Sandoz, because I came with no procurement experience. And the job was leading the API category for Sandoz. And I had no procurement experience whatsoever. And I often sort of reflect on why that person made the decision to take a chance on me, because I knew some chemistry, I knew production, I knew a bit about supply chain, and I knew a bit about the sales. So I knew some of the procurement group, but actually never having done procurement to say that person is the right fit for that role and taking a chance. And it proved to be a massive turning point for me. But also, I sometimes think, well, what was it that really made them take that chance? Because it was a risk for them. And I'll be forever grateful for that. I think as well, some of the peers I work with in Novartis, Carol Danoff, who's the CPO of Discovery Warner Brothers now, she was also amazing. I think she really sort of taught me and helped me to see about this point about putting people at the center. and really thinking about that. And she really sort of changed my approach to leadership. And that was through peer coaching. I mean, she was never my coach and such, but yeah, it was an amazing time to learn from the best.
Yeah, someone willing to listen, ask questions, push you, because it was a good 10 years. I mean, you before we dive into some of the other topics, I mean, you went from category leader of the APIs to the most senior job in procurement in a short period of
Yeah,
time, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, no, that was yeah, it was good times. So I think I did the API category, and obviously that's very chemically kind of focused in terms of how you think about that. And we were buying that, and I got the chance to move from doing that to buying all the finished dosage forms that we buy, which is completely different in a way, because Sandoz was also a big manufacturer of finished dosage forms. So you had the like make versus buy tension going on. You could do insourcing, you could do outsourcing, but it also got me much more connected then to pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical production rather than chemical production, and much more involved and much closer to the markets, which was a big step and a big learning. And then I got the chance to be the chief procurement officer at Sandoz at that time. And I then discovered the wonderful world of indirect procurement, which, again, I'd never touched before. Was a huge learning curve for me, but was a great development to sort of see direct materials procurement, then finished dosage form procurement with all the make or buy aspects, and then to finally do indirect on all the services that we were buying and the human capital related stuff. So it was a fantastic school for me to sort of learn the nuts and bolts of procurement.
yeah. And with procurement, it's leadership fluent through influence sometimes. You've got your own team to manage, but you've also got a stakeholder group and suppliers. So it's quite a complex leadership role. When did you start to like create the magic formula, curiosity, connection with people, ability to lower judgment? Because for the listeners, you've then gone from the biggest companies, right, in the pharma sector, to then you've worked for PE-backed smaller organizations. It's been, a wild ride since then, from working in completely different companies outside of large pharma. What's the biggest shift, I suppose, that you think is required, or mindset shift, leadership shift, whatever it be, to make the transition going from one of the biggest and one of the best to then maybe slightly unknown organizations?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it has many facets. I think Novartis, Sandoz was the great school of finance in a way.
Yep.
Probably learned more about finance than I learned about pharmaceuticals. I think what you really learn is that it's finance's role to set strategy, goals and objectives. They have to translate in the end into a P&L and a balance sheet that makes sense. And in order to do that, finance's role is really to allocate the resources. I think procurement comes to the party and is able to provide headroom, de-risk, and provide more resources for that equation. And that's really, in my view, and I think I learned that during that time, Sandoz Novartis, that's the role of finance. You bring this behemoth organization together in some way, and you're able to manage it in such a way that in the end of the year, your P&L and balance sheet are pretty much where they're supposed to be. And you do that through this system. And as I say, for anybody, and I'm sure it's the same in many, many other big organizations, that's the way it works. And you're a cog in the wheel and making that happen. But in terms of the education that you get on that, it's incredible. When I moved to Stata, I think my big mistake in a sense was I underestimated the task at hand. I kind of had the view, well, if you've done it in a company like Novartis and you've been successful in that environment, then doing it in a much smaller organization, it should be fairly straightforward. And how wrong you can be, because when I got to Stata and came in as the CPO, but you realize the power of the machine that you had behind you in the big corporate organization, and that actually what you were looking at was an extremely small slice of the world. And all of a sudden, you're in this position where you're 100% responsible for, everything that's going on, and your processes and your systems and the way that data comes together is not the best, let's say, looking like that. And all the ways that you would have done things in the past just sort of go out the window. So that was a huge learning for me. And interestingly, when I was working at Novartis, I kind of always said, I want to go and build a total procurement system somewhere. Yeah. And at Stata, I 100% got the opportunity to build that because there was more or less nothing in place. We didn't have a P2P system in place, so we were just implementing that. We didn't have a kind of an outsource model, so we were just implementing that. The category management wasn't pulling through. We had to do that. And at the same time, obviously, this was a PE-backed enterprise, so they had very ambitious goals in terms of what they wanted to deliver for the business. And when I kind of looked over my shoulder and was looking for the organization behind me in terms of being able to do it, effectively there was nobody there. It was just like, well, that's your job, you go figure that out. So I mean I guess what I'd say is be careful what you wish for, because the whole thing about I wanted to build this incredible procurement system, I got the opportunity to do it 100%, but it was a lot tougher than I had imagined, and putting all the different bits and pieces into place was a challenge, and you had to work very hard to do that. I think it made me much more empathetic, and I would have been much more empathetic during my time in Novartis, when I could have been a bit critical of some of my peers and the things they were doing. But when you actually have to do them yourselves, then you understand the challenges that are there.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
And you were quite early on in that talent migration from large pharma to, mid-size, smaller to mid-size companies, because there's been more PE money, recently over the last 5-6 years in life sciences. Lots of people have made that transition, but not everybody has made it successfully, right?
Yeah.
Getting into the slipstream of a smaller business, as you said, without all of the big company stuff behind you. I mean, what behaviors do you think stayed consistent for you from large pharma into that other environment that actually then made you successful? And then I'll ask you another question in a minute about what else you had to learn from a leadership standpoint.
Yeah, I think I brought with me the sort of the main thing that I'd learned in Sandoz Novartis, which was this: what's the role of finance, and what is procurement trying to do? How does procurement create value at the core of that? How does that brought through category? I mean, I think that was kind of my playbook that I brought into it. What I learned and what I had to do as well was to bring a system that actually, we have a P2P process. We're good at controlling the spend. We know what we're spending. We're covered by POs. Our invoicing is working well. And then critically, how does our data look like? And almost from day one, when I got into Stata, that was the big problem, which was sorting out the data and figuring that out and making sure that we had a system in the end of the day that we could actually build a category strategy on. I always kind of say data leads to insights, insights leads to ideas, ideas lead to projects, projects when executed really well, they lead to money in the bank. But at the end of the day, it all starts with the data. And if the data is wrong or not very good, it's not particularly helpful in driving the sausage machine that you're trying to then drive for value. So I think that putting that right, and the whole kind of P2P process and system landscape was the critical thing in that journey, in that build.
Yeah. And what about from a team dynamic? How many people were in the procurement organization in a Novartis Sandoz versus Stada, and then, moving on to Moderna? How has that team evolved?
I mean, there were very good people in Stardust. So I had good people to work with. But as you say, I mean, I think the procurement group was 1,000 people in Novartis, and I think my team was 350 or something like that. So It was a huge team. I forget the exact numbers that we had in Stata, but much smaller operation. And actually, what we did was partner with a BPO company to build in resources in lower cost locations. And again, in Novartis, that was set up for you because you had the global service centers. But yeah, I had to build all of that. So I ended up building that relationship with BPO providers, and then also building our own service center in India, which was something that, again, I'd never done from scratch before, but was a great asset, I think, coming out of Stata. So I think you have to figure that organization dynamic out, what you need, and what's the best way to go about that, and how to build that. But it was really a build from scratch because they, as I said, they had nothing in place.
So you build from scratch, you get it rocking and rolling, you're in a really good spot, you're 5 years in, and then the next opportunity pops up.
Yeah, and it was really a no-brainer, I think, for me to sort of to make that jump and move over to Moderna. I'd sort of admired Moderna from afar in terms of what they'd done during the pandemic, and I obviously knew quite a few people who'd gone over there and worked there. But for me, it was, I guess, the last chance I would have to be part of one of those like great stories in the industry, and the idea, which I still think is quite an audacious idea, that you can get into a completely new area of medicine. You can build a platform. That platform can have multiple uses and multiple products and multiple possibilities, and that you're developing the science, the technology, the processes, the people, the organization, the manufacturing capability, and it's all new, and able to do incredible things, and to be part of that, and to help them succeed in their mission to bring this new technology to the world. That was something I really couldn't resist or turn down. But in many ways, I think Stata was a great place too, and I think particularly the private equity element of it was a great lesson. I mean, people often talk about the private equity lens, and I think that's sometimes misinterpreted, because I think people think that's kind of aggressive negotiations, and you're really sort of nickel and diming everything, and you're really aggressive, and you really after cost savings. But actually, in my experience, it wasn't like that at all. The private equity lens is if you provide me $1 into the P&L, and I have a sale multiple of, I don't know, for argument's sake, let's say 10 times or 12 times, 12 times EBIT, then basically your $1 that you're bringing is worth $12 in enterprise value. And they were very, I forget the exact numbers, but it was something like deliver 250 million of bottom line impact, and then at a 12 times enterprise value, when it comes to sale, that's worth $3 billion. So the private equity lens, in my opinion, is just a wonderful appreciation of what procurement can do and what procurement can bring to the table. And that's really what I found. And they were nothing but supportive. And in any way that we wanted to go after value or help the business to be successful, they were massively supportive. So again, I think, sort of like corporate world is a great school, wonderful school. I would always recommend to people that if they ever get the chance to do a spin into private equity, to have a go, because again, what you learn through that process is fascinating.
Yeah. And throughout all of this, though, you've been able to work in different environments that, are focused on, as you said, bottom line. There is a focus on savings. There's no way of getting around it. How do you work on the human leadership aspect when there is that kind of pressure on? you spoke about, was it Carol earlier that gave you
Hmm.
the kind of people centricity piece?
Hmm.
Can you tell us more about that? How human leadership has helped you deliver good savings and create great teams?
I think my And I think that's the transition I've made through my career. As I said, I think earlier in my career it was very content driven, very savings driven, very like category driven, and it's all about the result, and it's about the goal, it's about the objective. And I think I've changed that completely. I mean, that's still there; it's still part of my DNA for sure. But I think what you learn is that building the team is actually the most important thing, and helping the team to feel valued. I think feeling psychologically safe, to feel supported, um, and to feel that they have a voice, and really to give people the room to grow and to be successful, and to back them in being successful, and to coach and mentor them to be successful. I think is much more powerful than setting goals and objectives and savings targets and any of that really. So that has been the transition, and I think, as I said, I've had the chance to work for wonderful leaders who I've seen to do that. I think, again, going back to the Sandoz days, there was one leader in particular that I worked for, and it was interesting because this leader didn't have a great reputation in the business somehow, but I loved him. He was amazing because every time I kind of went in on a one-on-one with him, he would just sit me down. He would continually ask questions and continually push. And I always felt that the accountability was on me. And then, funnily enough, he was replaced by another leader who had a good reputation in the company. But when I went into one-on-ones with him, the guy just talked about himself for the entire time and never asked a single question. And you kind of walk out after 30 minutes or an hour, and then you say, well, what was that? Actually, I didn't learn anything, didn't ask me anything. There was nothing about me. It was just all about him. So I think learning from the good, learning from the bad as well, I think that's very important. But yeah, I've been extremely lucky in my career for a lot of the people that I've worked with. I think, one of the people that really kind of stuck out to me, now the CEO of Sanofi, but I got the chance to work with in Novartis, and just an incredible human-centric leader, and really taught me that you need to take the work seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. And that was also it was an amazing lesson that I got in that time.
Yeah,
But yeah, many people who have influenced me positively.
and it seems as though you've made almost like a conscious effort and shift to go from, goal orientated, maybe a little bit, and I don't know, I was never in your teams, but maybe a bit more pressure, a bit more impact being driven, to then trying to open up slightly, become a bit more human centric and actually get better performance from your team,
Yeah,
but still have that underlying DNA, as you said, of getting things done.
yeah. And you learn as well from difficult experiences. And I've also been very lucky to have great coaches that I've worked with, and one particularly, I at one time in my career I was let go. Happened fairly early in my career. It was actually just before I joined Sandoz Novartis, and I was let go for performance issues. So I mean, that's always difficult to take. And up until that point, I think my career had been relatively successful. But I remember on that day feeling like this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And then when I kind of reflect back on that event now, I would say, well, actually, it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me. But the journey between those two realities was a very, very long and painful journey, because I think when I was let go, I think I allowed it to go to a feeling of self-worth, and that damaged me quite a lot. And even when I started my career in Sandoz, I had this really, really unhealthy view. If I was in a meeting with like 25 different people, for some reason I would all kind of think that they were all looking at me. Of course, they weren't at all. You know, they've got their own things to think about and their own points to make and their whatever. But I just had this unhealthy feeling that everybody was like focused on me and what I'm doing and if I'm doing it right. And this really sort of detracted me from the content of what I was trying to achieve. And I found that really, really difficult to manage. And I got to work with this coach, and I can't even remember the guy's second name. I remember he was called Steve. He was an American guy. And I got the chance to work with him for a while. And he did two things for me. The first thing he did was so important because we actually tracked it back to the fact that, you know, I'd been let go and that had some kind of impact and it triggered me in some way. And he actually said to me these words. He said, "This does not define you." And I think it's probably one of the most important things I've ever had to learn, that even though bad things happen, they don't define you. And super important lesson. And then he gave me kind of a mechanism to cope with it. He says, look, you know what this is happening, you know when it's happening, you need to name it, you need to get rid of it, you need to push it to one side. So we named it, and he came up with a name which is an awful American name, but it was Herb. And he said, call it Herb, and then Herb has to go away for drinks and hors d'oeuvres when, you know, you need to focus on the content and you need to be present in the moment. And with some practice, that really worked. And I think that was the start of the journey to get me out of that, which was extremely important. And then I got to work with another coach who I've been working with since the time in Stata, was actually an ex-colleague. And she really taught me the ability about lowering judgment. And this was a key part of our sort of coaching mentality and the ability to ask questions. And we really worked on that hard together and developed it. And I actually hadn't realized it, but, you know, I was always giving people the benefit of my experience and, you know, making statements all the time about, you know, this is how you do it, and this is a good thing to do, and think about this, and blah, blah, blah. It sounds super simple, and I'm sure most people do it, but if you just ask the question, then the person opposite you, they have to say what they think, and then the accountability is on them. And it's incredible the difference it makes. One, because you're not judging, and secondly, because you're pushing the accountability where it belongs. And it's so easy and sounds so easy, and yet so powerful that, again, massive lesson. And I was very lucky to work with coaches like that who are able to change things in you like that.
Yeah, because it is interesting. Not everybody is investing in themselves with coaches with the ability to speak openly, because, you know, redundancies or, you know, losing your job, there is an element of professional grief that comes with it. And if
Mm-hmm.
you don't go and talk it through, talk it out, find a way around it, it can be all consuming. So, you know, I've had some guests on here that haven't invested in the coaches necessarily, and maybe it's taken them a longer time to get where they need to get to. So it's really interesting that you've had a couple that have made such a significant impact on you.
Yeah, massive. Yeah, I think, you know, for anybody who's not done coaching, I mean, it's probably the best way to make improvement. I mean, everybody has blind spots, so, you know, and it's amazing. It's amazing how many things can change, and you know, you can never have enough self-awareness at the end of the day.
Yeah, totally agree.
I mean, there is no limit on self-awareness.
Changing gears here quickly. Okay. So you've started again a few times, right? You've been able to do some self work as well, which is great, but you've worked new countries, new teams, new organizations, totally different types of structures. Why does that appeal to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I have been opportunistic to some extent. I think as the opportunities come along, I've always viewed, well, more recently at least, I've viewed contracts as job contract is a contract. You know, it's terms and conditions. I've spent my whole life looking at contracts. If you get the chance, and it can be terminated on both sides, right? So, I mean, if you get the chance of better terms and conditions, then why not? So, I mean, that's clearly a part of it. But at the end of the day, I think it's your attraction to the mission and what is trying to be achieved. And I would say as well, I think it's sort of the people that you get to work with. And I think, that's true in Moderna. As I said, I've been very, very lucky to have incredible bosses over the years. And I think like many people, I have a dotted line boss and a solid line boss. So I report into the CFO and also have a dotted line into the CTO in Moderna. But just two incredible people who are challenging. They ask great questions. They're very human-centered, but just great human beings. But also, extremely bright, articulate, and you can learn so much from them. And I think that's very much true of Moderna and the culture. It's very much about learning. It's about innovation. It's about disruption, and it's about pushing the boundaries of science and innovation. And why wouldn't you want to be a part of that, particularly when you can apply it to something like oncology, which is just, everybody has been touched in some way by oncology. And so the ability to be a part of that in some way is just so appealing.
Yeah.
And you can't I couldn't really resist it, that kind of opportunity.
And another rebuild, but this time in a completely different way. Do you want to just give us a quick overview of like how different from 1,000 people in the Novartis Sandoz procurement function to a PE-backed Stata to now Moderna that is, as I understand it, procurement of the future. Is that right?
Well,
or trying to be.
I mean, when I interviewed for the position, and I had a long conversation with the CEO actually, and he said to me, come and build the procurement group of the future. That's what I really want, and that's what I want you to do. And then there was 4 months in between that conversation and me actually walking in the door for one reason and another. And when I actually walked in the door, I think the impact of what it's like to go from the pandemic to the endemic situation was really dawning on the business at those moments. And when I walked through the door, then there was just like, we need to save as much as we can and, go and figure out the contracts first. So I think I've been there 2 years now, nearly, and, we've been working through doing fairly typical savings work, but we've come back to this procurement of the future concept, and what that looks like and what it builds. And it's incredibly refreshing to be able to do that in an organization like Moderna, because you don't have a massive amount of complexities that you might have in a big corporate, like, multiple ERP systems or all of that stuff to deal with. It's fairly compact, fairly centralized, everything's built, and they make a big fuss about platforms. And that just doesn't mean the platform of mRNA, which obviously primarily it means, because that's kind of our secret sauce in the world. But it also means, do things the same way time and time again. And when you build technology stacks, then build it with a platform approach, which I think is great, because we have one harmonized instance of SAP. We are able to harmonize many of the systems that go along with it. It's the same in all parts of the company, in all parts of the world. So we have a great advantage. And I think with what's coming along now in the industry in terms of the ability of GPTs to take work out of the system and the ability of agentic AI to be able to contribute to the workforce, it's just such an incredible time to be thinking about that in a company like Moderna, which values disruption, innovation, and the best of technology, and allows people the freedom to experiment with that technology, which I think is I've said this many times, but I will never get this opportunity again to do this kind of thing in this way and in this setup. But it's just an amazing time.
Yeah, stars have aligned, and as you say, I think that kind of platform approach, and also not having not being overly tangled from 100 years of how a business has, grown and evolved. It's, as you said, way more compact and easier to navigate. But obviously, with big savings targets because of the change in what's happened, with the products and stuff, it just seems like the perfect storm.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's you couldn't really write it, but obviously going from like 20 billion a year sales down to 2, not many organizations will be able to cope with that. We have a development pipeline that is on par probably with some of the biggest in the industry. So we're having to spend a huge amount of money to bring the new products to market, but doing that as efficiently as possible and having spend efficiency as a very strong goal and return on investment as a very strong goal, and to be able to help the company to manage its cash effectively as we transition through that period. I'm not sure of where I would find that kind of dynamic, at the same time being able to do the best of the best with technology, disruption, innovation, AI, agentic AI. It's yeah, I just do not think I would get it again. So I'm trying to take as much advantage of it as I can while I have this position.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And you and I in the run up to this, we were talking about like your career and how you have, almost redefined what success looks and feels like for you. So you got some great chapters behind you now, lots of different environments, different size teams, all that kind of stuff. How has your like personal definition, I suppose, of success or successful leadership changed over that time?
Yeah, I think I don't want it to sound too arrogant, but I think I've figured out the secret of success finally in my life. But it probably does sound a bit arrogant, but I think the secret of success is that you actually define it for yourself. And it took me a long time to understand that. So I'm a big fan of Leadership of the Inside Out, Kevin Cashman book. I think I've read it like 6 times, but I actually picked up on something that he said in that book, which is, if you work in a company, there is an external view, and that's based on P&L, it's based on balance sheet, it's based on share price, all of those kinds of things, and that's how the external world defines success for a company. But it's not the reason that you get up and go to work every day. You're not doing it for that, because you're sort of much more in the day-to-day. It's what you're trying to achieve as a company. It's the people that you're working with. It's the feeling that you get. It's the culture. It's the experience that you have. That's why, you go to work every day. You don't go there because of the way the external world monitors the success. And it's the same as an individual, I think. Externally, people are going to look at you and they're going to judge how successful that they think you have been. And that might be a multiple of things. It might be the job you have, it might be where you live, it might be the car you drive, it might be the watch you wear, whatever. They're going to judge you in a certain way, but that's not the way that you judge yourself. The reality is, you can define success for yourself, and then the only person really accountable as to whether you have made it or not is you. So it's entirely within your control. And I think once I'd managed to figure that out, the rest of it was relatively easy. And I think, again, working with this coach that I was working with for the last 5 years or so, we kind of worked through that together and kind of figured out what was really important to me. And in the end, it boiled down to very, very simple things. It was about sleeping well. It was about eating well, which means eating healthily, not eating well, which I can also do. It was about exercise. and feeling good about myself. And importantly, and I think probably the most important one, it was about detachment from the workplace, and being able to detach from the workplace. So that again was something I was seriously struggling with, because at first my first approach to it was to kind of set boundaries and say I'm not going to work beyond 7 p.m. at night, that kind of thing. But if mentally you're still thinking about it, then there is no benefit at the end of the day. So it's that ability to break away from that and to be able to focus on other things and do other things, and have other interests. And that was a game changer, actually. And again, it took time to develop. We had to work on it. We had to talk about it a lot, but developing that detachment was extremely important, in terms of feeling successful. And I also created this kind of limit, which is, I'm interested in being successful every day. So, if on one day I fail for whatever reason, it's kind of okay, because tomorrow is a new day, right? We just start again. So that also helps in terms of, managing that feeling of whether we succeed or not. But I think the biggest thing was that distinction between how other people look at you and judge you, to, in the end, how you judge yourself. And that really, that learning, I think, I don't know why it came to me so late in life, but that learning was the key.
Yeah, love it. I actually have something very similar that I do. So, like, it's interesting that eat, sleep, balance, fitness, family, whatever it might be. And I have like this really simple mechanism. I score myself every day, either +1, 0, or -1. And then by the end of the week, I go, okay, it's not been a bad week. Don't beat yourself up too much. If you didn't get to run every day or go to the gym, you did it 3 times. It's more than most.
Yeah, -7 isn't too bad, right?
Yeah,
So I mean,
exactly. Yeah, it's when when you're not feeling it. But I think it's really interesting, the kind of philosophical element of that, but it's the judgment of yourself. That's the key here.
yeah,
It takes time, but it seems as though the self-work that you've done and the, professional development that you've also had going at the same time has given you the opportunity to really look inward and be able to make that change. So thank you for sharing that. It's really great.
yeah.
So before we leave, I always like to ask though about a couple of things. So I like the future of like the industry, life sciences, and also the future of leadership. So what are you excited about, or what are you thinking about when it comes to the future of life sciences at the moment?
I mean, obviously, I'm excited about the power of mRNA, and in the end, that's why I joined Moderna. I think particularly when I look at what can be achieved in oncology, I think, and that's not just Moderna. I think there are a raft of companies at the moment that have got great lines on how oncology can be treated in a multiple of different ways. And if you really think about cancer and some of the lectures that I've heard since I've been in as part of Moderna, and you start to realize that it's such a complex problem and a complex issue, and can be solved in a variety of ways and mechanisms and different mechanisms, and you need all of those options. So I think what Moderna is doing is amazing. It's fantastic. I love it, and pray to God that it works as we think it will work. But there are loads of other companies as well working on different strategies and different targets, but I think with all the efforts of the combined companies across the industry, I think it will next 10, 15 years be a real game changer in terms of treatment options, which I think is amazing, because as I said, everybody, including myself, we've all been touched by cancer in some way. And that ability that's coming, I'm very, very excited about.
Yeah, perfect. And what about the future of leadership? Because obviously that's evolved massively from, as you said, your unionized leadership role
Yeah.
in the north of England to the future of what is going to come, and Gen Z on the way through, and AI. So what about the future of leadership? How do you see it evolving?
I think that's the really exciting thing for me, I think, and particularly with the work I'm doing around the future of procurement. But how is an agentic workforce population going to sit at the side of a human population? Interestingly, Moderna, again, it's something that I'd never really thought of as. I was kind of like, why is that the case? And then, but when you think about it, it makes total sense. So our digital AI group in the company reports into HR, which is great because I think in the future, it's all about workforce and it's about options, and you're going to have agents sitting beside humans, and you have to be able to manage across both worlds. And I think that's probably the change in leadership of the future. So while people centricity will be super important, you're also going to have to manage this side of the house, which is the tech stack and the agentic, and you have to figure out a way of bringing those two worlds together to achieve what you want to achieve. And that's the thing that I'm thinking about, spending huge amounts of time thinking about, and really privileged to have the opportunity to think about it in that setting. And I think it also starts to trigger thoughts of what is really important about the human element and what's important about the tech element. And I think the conclusion I'm sort of coming to in the human element is those human to human interactions that are really going to kind of set us apart, and where do they need to exist alongside what can be automated and run by agents. And I think that is going to be a fascinating topic for the next years, and will revolutionize so many things. But I mean, let's see where it goes. I mean, everybody's talking about it, nobody quite knows where it'll go, but yeah, it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I love it. And it seems as though you've got a good inside track there, because lots of people are kind of seeing it with a different lens, and there's fear, and it's actually, you're like, actually, if we get the best of both worlds working together, it could unlock human potential and also the tech side together.
Yeah. And but I think the fear is understandable, and I think the reason I'm kind of leaning into it is because of the company culture.
Yeah.
Which is really driven from the top. I mean, our CEO, he talks about it. He says some interesting things, but he says this isn't like the internet, like coming along and changing things. This is like electricity. It's like the invention of electricity. If you think about what electricity actually changed in the world, then we're talking about a similar level of change and shift. So the internet, in his view, that's nothing, right, compared to what this can do and achieve. And he's really kind of leaning into it. And I think that the really way that it shows up in culture is the allowance of people to experiment with the technology, which I think is super fair. Because if you don't allow the people to experiment with the technology and to understand it and to be able to build it, then on that day, all of a sudden, where people's jobs get replaced in AI, I mean, that wasn't really fair, right? Because you just say, well, the technology's come, but we didn't allow you to experiment with the tools or get to know the technology or whatever. But, by the way, it's replacing you. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a little bit where the fear comes from. Whereas you say, right, people lean into it, learn these new skills, think about it, think how it can be deployed, reinvent yourself. Then that's a different way of handling the issue, which I think, in my view, is super smart. And I'm very grateful for the fact that I get the opportunity to work in a company that thinks like that.
Yeah. And I'm very grateful, Alan, for the time that you spent today. It's been an absolutely superb discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I think there's been some real nuggets of leadership information, some great stuff that you've spoken about throughout all of this episode. It's been really enjoyable. Thank you very much for being one of the guests.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you.